finding my good colleague, Councillor Mr. De Jong, I have to declare a conflict on this next file.
Okay.
Similar to Arthur, I've been in my neighborhood, not quite decades, but certainly 2 decades, and I'm within eyesight of this particular project. So I have to declare a conflict, and am ready to be ejected for the moment.
All right, be ejected. Thank you, Mr. Lichko, for your presentation. And moving on to 7104 Nancy Green Drive, another private employee housing report. And this presentation is from planner Stephanie Johnson. Over to you, Ms. Johnson.
Hello, thank you, and good evening, Mayor and Council. This presentation is for a rezoning application, which requests Council's further consideration and direction on a new or a revised private employee housing development project. So now I'm just going to provide some background or context, information on the revised development proposal, next steps in the planning process, and recommendations for Council's consideration. So as you can see, the intent of this presentation is to outline for Council the revised details of this new 38-unit rental employee housing proposal under the municipality's private employee housing initiative. Really, at this stage, staff seek Council authorization on the further review and processing of this rezoning file, the proposed online public information and input opportunity, and the drafting of a zoning amendment bylaw for future Council consideration. Next slide, please. So the subject site is at 7104 Nancy Green Drive. It's 0.28 hectares in size, and it's currently cleared or leveled land. The existing zoning is Residential Estate Lands 1, RSE1. To the west of the site is Highway 99, or highway corridor running through Whistler. Also adjacent is the Fitzsimmons Walk development, a multifamily townhouse complex with both market and employee housing, which is adjacent to the site to both the north and east. Opposite the site, across Nancy Green Drive itself, are duplex and single family dwelling land use forms. Next slide, please. This slide presents an aerial photo of the immediate area, and it shows a buffer along the Highway 99 corridor, which has been cleared of vegetation previously, similar to many other right-of-way areas, such as the Nestor's commercial node. Next slide, please. So as Council will recall, in September 2018, 9 private employee housing initiatives were reviewed and authorized for further processing and refinement. In March of 2019, Council endorsed revised guidelines for evaluating private sector rezoning proposals for employee housing. And those revised guidelines provided for greater flexibility with respect to housing tenure and form, while also introducing some flexibility for consideration of variances to parking requirements, for example, and providing direction regarding the character and neighborhood fit for a development proposal. So in acknowledgement of the above, the applicant has submitted a revised proposal in March of this year to respond to earlier concerns that he heard by the public and Council and staff as well. The planning team just wanted to outline that the applicant is still committed to constructing a 100% employee rental housing project. Next slide, please. So previous concerns identified by the community at the beginning of the review included the overall scale, the massing and density proposed for the site, the need for enhanced buffering, screening, and privacy from Fitzsimmons Walk, the siting of the apartment building, and by siting, I'm really speaking to the setback, the height, the impact that the massing would have on possible shading, and even noise from the proposal. Other concerns identified include traffic and parking impact, and generally the overall quality of design and how the proposal fits within the existing neighborhood context. So planning staff certainly recognize the need for, additional employee housing in Whistler. And in order to continue moving forward with the processing of these private employee housing initiatives, staff are recommending a revised proposal. And similar to my colleague, Roman, a new approach for us during the pandemic in terms of engagement opportunities online. Next slide, please. So the revised proposal includes 38 employee restricted dwelling units within a 3-story apartment building. The mixture of units include 1 bedrooms, which also include studio style suites, 1 bedrooms with flex spaces, 2 bedrooms with some flex spaces, and then there's 1 3-bedroom with flex space unit being proposed in the building. All units would have in-suite laundry, a private balcony and dining area, with additional secured storage areas being provided in conjunction with 22 secure garage style parking spaces in the underbuilding parking stalls proposed. Secured bicycle parking is also proposed in a separate accessory building to be located on site. The revised proposal also includes a reduction in the density and height to help be more compatible with the adjacent land uses, additional landscape areas for increased socializing, and to provide for enhanced screening and buffering from those adjacent land uses. And also there's been an increase to the amount of parking, and the amount of parking being provided has been made to allow for 1 parking space per dwelling unit, with the addition of 4 visitor parking spaces and 1 loading bay. Next slide, please. So this slide, or table rather, really shows where the development has come from. There's been a lot of movement and progress to date. As we can see, the original proposal was for 65 units housed within a 5-story building, and now Council's considering a revised concept for 38 employee housing units in a 3-story building. And so essentially this represents a reduction in floor space ratio from 1.8 originally, which we saw in May of 2018, to now 0.95. Next slide, please. This slide really shows some of the earlier design renderings for those original proposals that Council considered, and really takes into consideration how this development has evolved throughout this planning process. And staff just want to highlight that these are design renderings. They're really great illustrative tools aimed at showing attributes of a given design, but are highly conceptual in nature and really just allow for a quick visual perspective. Next slide, please. So this slide presents a comparison of other multifamily developments, which are primarily employee housing sites, really to outline or see how this particular proposal stacks up at a high level. And so this comparison shows that the proposal is within the range of other approved projects in Whistler. So it's just a high level snapshot. Next slide, please. So the next few slides I'm going to present show the site plan, building elevation, and landscape plans for this revised proposal. As you can see on the screen in front of you, this is the site plan. Shows the foundation of the parkade, and it really shows the relationship of the foundation in the context of the overall site in terms of the front, side, and rear setbacks. And you can see some of the building envelopes of the adjacent Fitzsimmons Walk development as well. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides show the building elevations. As you can see on the top, we've got the building elevation as it faces Highway 99. At the bottom of the slide would be the northeast facing Fitzsimmons Walk. Next slide, please. And once again, we have the southeast elevation facing Fitzsimmons Walk, and then southwest, the front of the site facing Nancy Green Drive. And, you know, the elevations are great to show the massing of the building. However, they don't have the context of the overall grading plans or the landscaping and buffering overlaid, which also helps to soften the development. Next slide, please. This is just really a sample or typical floor plan layout, just to give some perspective for council. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides show the revised proposed dwelling unit layouts. And I just want to call council's attention to Unit B, which happens to be in the lower left-hand corner of this slide. And so Unit B in the bottom left-hand corner is the smallest unit proposed at approximately 378 square feet in size. And this is smaller than comparable studio units approved previously in Whistler. And so we looked at some other similar development projects. For example, the Chiakmis Apartments in Checkmas have studio suites that are approximately 430 square feet in size. And also the Beaver Flats development in Creekside also has studio units, and they are approximately 455 square feet in size. And these particular studio suites also have comparable rents with this project. So we just wanted to call that out for council's attention. Next slide, please. This is the final slide showing the additional unit layouts. And so we can see that there are 1-bedroom units being proposed, 1 bedroom with flex spaces. And then of course, we've got a 3-bedroom unit with flex space proposed as well. Next slide, please. This is really a collection of images which show an example of a micro-dwelling unit. And this micro-dwelling unit itself was approved for a development project in Mammoth Lakes, California. We all know that's a ski resort community. The image being shown represents a micro-dwelling unit for approximately 400 square feet in size, just to give you some context. And it really allows one to get a better flavor and feel of what practical layout would look like for this type of dwelling unit size in terms of usability as well. So staff just wanted to outline that the size of this unit is smaller than those previously approved in Whistler, which would require, I think, some further investigation related to the overall design and livability components moving forward, if this is a direction that Whistler wants to move towards. And staff just also wanted to highlight that there is an overall trend in the evolution of micro dwelling units, and really it's connected to affordability and you know, providing lower costs and increased affordability. Next slide, please. So the next few slides really show the landscape plans that are being proposed. The plan on the slide in front of you really focuses on the leading edge of the development site from the highway. As we all know, the southwest corner especially, there's a focus on the site. It's a highly visible site for Whistler, adjacent to our highway corridor. Next slide, please. This image shows how screening, buffering, and outdoor amenity spaces are being contemplated at both the front and rear of the site. Next slide, please. And finally, staff have included this image really to convey the type of both hard and soft landscaping treatments being proposed, and also some of those features and furniture that would also help to accent the overall landscape design. Next slide, please. So a pro forma has been received for this proposal, and that pro forma really sets out development costs, the operating costs, projected revenues, projected return on investments, and the proposed rental rates. And so just to provide a snapshot or range, the proposed rents are approximately $1,307 per month for those studio size suites, to $2,236 to almost $2,750 per month for a 2-bedroom unit, ranging in size from 644 square feet to 940 square feet. in size, and this would be without utilities. The proposed rents are considered to be below market and comparable to WHA's Category 5 rental rates. Staff just wanted to outline that further review of the proposed rents are to be completed in conjunction with a third-party review of the development pro forma, project feasibility, and developer returns, including the proposed number and size of units being proposed. Next slide, please. So should council authorize to undertake drafting a zoning amendment bylaw, the new site-specific zone would establish permitted uses, maximum density, building heights and setbacks, and consideration of new rental-only restrictions. Similar to all other rezoning processes, further public input, the third-party pro forma evaluation, and review by the advisory design panel would also be required prior to the holding of a statutory public hearing. A housing agreement and a development covenant would also be standard requirements for this development proposal. Next slide, please. So this slide really outlines how this project stacks up against Whistler's revised private sector employee housing criteria. And we've used red to sort of show areas where I think additional work would need to be required. And so I'll just focus on that with the color in blue mostly complying with the revised criteria. So staff just really wanted to highlight that further review of the unit sizes and the rents and the overall neighborhood fit related to massing, form and character, and landscape screening would still be required. In addition, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure approval would be required for related traffic impacts. And certainly council and staff would need to turn their mind to a parking variance to reduce the overall number of parking stalls to allow for one parking stall per dwelling unit. And this would need to be considered by council. Next slide, please. The development site does lie within a development permit area, and it generally meets the guidelines for form and character and for wildfire protection under our existing official community plan. Moving forward, the proposal would also be evaluated against Whistler's updated official community plan once it's adopted. As outlined earlier, a new custom site-specific zone for this development proposal would also need to be crafted. Next slide, please. So in terms of community engagement, there are a lot of similarities to the proposal that my colleague Roman just presented moving forward. So to date, as we know, there's a development notification sign which has been posted on site. Application materials that has been presented to council are available for review on our municipal website under our active development projects section. As council will recall, we have received letters of support and opposition for the previous application submittals, and these were included in the September 2018 report to council. So at this stage, staff are recommending an online public information and input opportunity, similar to what Roman was describing earlier, and that has to do with holding or obtaining public and community engagement during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then in addition to that, the community engagement would also include our statutory requirements, which would be a public hearing if council gave staff direction to move this application forward and to craft the draft zoning amendment bylaw. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, just to wrap up for council, of course, we would have the online public information and input opportunity, the third-party confidential pro forma evaluation, and then the application would be reviewed to our advisory design panel. And the advisory design panel would be looking at the development footprint, building massing, form and character, unit sizes, layouts and livability, and certainly site access and parking. Next slide, please. So through the continued review process, staff would undertake further development analysis and refinement of the proposal, recognizing additional council feedback and community feedback prior to drafting a custom site-specific zoning amendment bylaw for future consideration by council. Next slide, please. And ultimately, staff recommend that council support further review and processing of this 38-unit private sector employee housing proposal in accordance with the recommendation on the screen in front of you. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Questions? Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Currently, is there any other zone in Whistler that has a minimum floor or a minimum size requirement for a dwelling unit?
I may have to defer that one to our director of planning if he's available. Off the top of my head, I'm not recalling a minimum size. Councillor Ford.
Mike's on the line, Stephanie.
Perfect.
Yes, I do believe that there are some zones that have that kind of provision. If I recall correctly, that pertains more to auxiliary dwelling units, suites. But I'm not familiar with any minimum dwelling sizes for a principal dwelling within our zoning bylaw.
Okay, and then does the current proposal include any kind of language around a minimum size, or is that something that you want to include in that further review of unit size that you had on your slide there?
The current proposal doesn't lay out minimums, but that's certainly something that staff could look at moving forward.
Yeah, if I may just add to that, I think through the process, we would look at the livability of those units. We'd look at trends in resident housing and appropriateness for Whistler. We would do further research on that. I think we could specify minimum sizes within the zoning bylaw, but also typically what we do is through the zoning process, we'll have a approved design, a supported design for the whole project. And then that design gets locked in by way of a covenant that's registered on title. And so that covenant would specify the overall development, form and character, and those design details, as well as specify the layouts of the units.
Okay, and then my final question to this point is, in our neighboring communities, does Pemberton or Squamish or do they have a minimum size? I do note that there was a proposal quite a while ago now on a micro suite property. I believe it was in Pemberton, where the units were going to be 300 or less square feet per unit, and obviously intended for a single occupant. And I'm just wondering if this is a common, is there any common regulations in BC that is sort of addressing this minimum livable size? Is this something that we can include in our information so that we have kind of the whole picture?
Yeah, I'll just follow through with this question. Stephanie may have something to add as well, because I know that she's familiar with what the City of Vancouver is doing through her work with the City of Vancouver. But yes, that's definitely something that we can research. And I do know that the District of Squamish has actually adopted some zoning for, I'm not sure if it's micro suites, but certainly small homes and those kinds of things. So they're definitely pursuing those kinds of directions.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Councillor Forsyth.
Thanks for that presentation. That was really interesting. With the smaller units, I think you said they were 325 square feet or some such. Was that a Murphy bed in the picture? And is a Murphy bed what's prescribed in those small units?
I'm just going to see if we can actually get back in the presentation to the layout of the unit on the layout slides. I think it was the first layout slide showed the smallest micro dwelling unit or studio suite being proposed. In terms of the Murphy bed, I would just have to look at that layout. The Murphy bed plan that was shown in the presentation was the one that we received from Mammoth Lakes. So that's an entirely different proposal, but we felt that that image allowed for a good visual representation of how that space could be used. So if we're not able to find that slide, I would have to go back and look at that proposed layout in terms of a Murphy bed, but it should be there.
Yeah, and with respect to the size of the unit, the smallest unit proposed is 378 square feet, I believe.
Thank you. One more question. The parking is going to require an amendment, but the proposal does say 1 stall per unit. So 38 units, 38 stalls, and then a little bit of visitor parking, correct?
That's correct. So the proposal, just as you described, 1 parking stall per dwelling unit is proposed with 4 visitor parking spaces and 1 loading bay. Our zoning bylaw parking requirements are higher than that standard. So it would be the applicant seeking a variance to that parking requirement. And I believe that parking requirement would be for 52 parking spaces instead of 42 being proposed now. So a reduction in 10 stalls.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and now does he have to do that? Is that application included in this, or is that something that runs concurrent to this application?
I don't know if our director of planning wants to jump in, but if we're looking at customizing a site-specific zone, you know, that could be something that we build into this particular rezoning process at the time it comes forward to council, should there be direction to proceed in that manner.
That makes sense to me. Thank you.
Councillor Jewett.
Thank you very much. Regarding parking, in WHA units, what is the ratio of parking per dwelling unit?
I'm going to defer that one to our director of planning, see if he's able to respond.
The director of planning wishes Roman was still on the line, but Roman's probably most knowledgeable about this, but there's a minimum of 1 space, and then depending on the size of the unit, there are additional spaces required. We, as a community, looked to encourage a shift away from the private automobile and to do that by various means. One of the things that the community did at a point in time was to adopt reductions to our typical standards for employee housing projects. So Rainbow and Cheakamus were approved at the zoning for 75% of the typical standard. We know from experience that those reductions have created issues within those neighborhoods when it comes to parking and parking challenges. We've discussed this with the general manager of the housing authority, who has concurred with those issues, and more recent projects have been striving towards the regular parking standards and minimum requirements. For this project, it does have an excellent walkable location with Nestor's Market across the highway, easy walking distance to Whistler Village. But we still felt that it was imperative to have a minimum of 1 stall per unit. If we think about this project, if there was a shortfall and people looking to park extra vehicles, there'd be no place to be able to park those vehicles. You've got Nancy Green Drive and you've got the highway. And so we think that there should be at least that minimum number of at least 1 per unit with the 4 visitor stalls.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, I'll say I have some comments for later. Thank you.
Other questions? Councillor Grills.
Just in the parking, when we have the third-party review of the rental rates, which is to wishes to come. They review the pro forma. Have we ever looked at the rates that would be charged for parking? I assume we're expecting that some of the tenants would not have vehicles, so it'll be on a first come first served basis as to who gets the secure parking stalls and who gets the other ones. And there'll be rates applied to that. And will we ever review the parking rates to be charged by the landlord to the tenants?
Yes, that would be part of the pro forma review. And looking at comparable projects, comparable rents within WHA projects, the rents in the different categories, which category 5 is what most of these projects are working towards, which is the category below market. And then, yeah, there are different rent components to be factored in, including base rent, utilities, what people charge for parking. So each of those components is looked at in the overall pro forma. And so, yeah.
Anyone else? The FSR is 0.95. Do you know what the FSR next door is at Fitzwalk?
I'm just going to see if I can pull that up on our presentation very quickly here.
It was very comparable to Fitzwalk. I believe that the market, there's two components at Fitzwalk. There's the employee component and the market component. Yeah. And I think the market component was actually a 1.05 FSR.
Great.
And I believe what's proposed here is about a 0.9 or
0.95.
Right.
Yeah.
And did I see bedrooms without windows in one? I couldn't tell what I was looking at, but was there a bedroom that didn't have a window in? And is that normal?
I don't recall off the top of my head if all bedrooms have windows in the proposal package in front of council. Certainly, I think from a livability point of view, staff would be looking at window placement as part of that with regards to bedrooms as well.
Great. Okay, thank you both very much. I have no further questions. Can I ask a member of council to make the resolution as laid out? Moved by Councillor Forsyth, second by Councillor Ford. Comments? Councillor Ford.
Thank you. I like this proposal. I like small units. I hear often from friends and community members who would like their own space, and they don't intend to spend a lot of time at home because they're out biking and skiing and doing all the things that this town enjoys. And so a smaller space that allows them to afford their own space without sharing with a bunch of renters, with a bunch of roommates, makes a lot of sense. And so I often hear from people advocating for tiny homes. I often hear from people saying, I don't want a 2-bedroom unit. I want a studio or a 1-bedroom. So this for me checks all the boxes where we were looking for private developers to come to the table and build some housing for us, as I previously mentioned in my comments on the last project. But it allows affordability. It allows units close to the village. You don't have to have a car. There's excellent transit. It's right across from a grocery store. This checks all the boxes for me. And the fact that it's a rental-only building also determines and helps us ensure that residents don't have multiple vehicles, because you get a vehicle if you have a parking spot. If you don't have a parking spot, you don't get to have a vehicle. These aren't long-term, I'm going to set up the rest of my life here. If you do, that's great. But we can kind of, the owner of the building can ensure that parking restrictions on the site are observed and honored. So I think that this is great for affordability. This checks all the boxes for me. And I want to be clear that I'm happy with the small size of certain units. It's nice to have some bigger units. It's nice to have a variety. It'll ensure that there's a variety of of rental rates, and it'll ensure, you know, a couple of different demographics can enjoy this building. And you know, I appreciate that they really kind of listened to the neighbors and they listened to the community through the last couple of years, and have really tailored this project to fitting the site and meeting the needs of the community. So
thank you. Councillor Forsyth.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I'm a bit skeptical about the really small units, but I'm not renting them, so maybe. But I think it might be. I'm not sure if the proponent would be amenable to making some kind of a display suite, not super advanced or anything, but just something that gave you a feel for what the size of those were moving forward at a public open house or whatever they're going to do whenever we can meet as humans again. And the parking, I'm willing to amend and go to the 38 spaces, but I'm cautious about the storage. So if you have a vehicle and a bike and a kayak or a paddleboard, is that all going to fit in that little space? Because if it's, you know, if they don't have a car, which I think a lot of young people are, like in 10 years, all the young people aren't going to have cars. So, but as long as there's enough room in that space to put all their toys, if they're living the life that Councillor Ford is imagining for them there. That's it.
Other comments, Councillor Dijon?
Fully support Councillor Ford's comments on having the diversity. We just have to have our numbers right. Don't build too many, but have enough, because it will make it workable for people that otherwise won't. Just a quick comment on the landscaping. Certainly looking for the most aggressive landscaping plan possible to provide the needed buffers in such a visually sensitive zone. I just wish I could take the trees from the Horseman project and plop them over there. We'd have a win-win, but I think that's very important. Thank you. Good work.
Other comments? Councillor Jewett.
Sorry, John. Yes, thank you very much. Ms. Johnson, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness looking at the size of the living space. And I hope that we'll investigate this further and make sure that that livability is there. So thank you very much for your focus on that. As far as the parking goes, yeah, I feel that this is the right site to be giving up some potential parking spots. It's close to so many things. And I'd also, just like to echo what Councillor Jackson said. Both of these proposals have the higher step code to deal with. So they have much higher building standards than the ones that were built 10 years ago. And I know that this proponent has done some extreme step code, almost to net zero buildings. So hopefully, if it's to that standard as well, that's going to improve the affordability even more, as well as the environmental impact. So thank you for your work on this, and I look forward to hearing looking at the finished product. Thank you.
Councillor Grills.
Yeah, I think the variety of units styles in this building, you're seeing flex spaces being a lot more common, and I don't have a problem with the micro units. I think there's definitely people in our community that would love to have their own private space and willing to live in a compact environment. It's really important though that the pricing is correct. It seems 375 square feet to me for $1,300 a month plus utilities. That seems on the beyond level 5, and it'll be interesting to see how the rents are impacted in the community in the coming year. Yeah, I like where the project's going, and I like the variety of units, but I think there's a little bit of work to be done with that third-party review of the rates.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what I've heard. I hope that the that the developer can sharpen their pencil on the per square foot rent cost on some of the smaller units. I agree that it's high. I agree on the size. To me, smaller units are something that we could really use. I thought Councillor Ford made a very good case for that. The word that keeps being used is livability. And so for me, it's not critical that it's, 500 square feet. I'd be happy to see smaller units as long as they're livable units. And I am concerned when I see no windows in bedrooms. And then I'll be interested to see what comes back as far as access to the site's concerned. I rode by there today, and it's on a corner, so it'll be interesting to see what ends up being delivered through the process as far as the access to the site and the comments you get back from OTI. But generally, I'm supportive of the direction that this is going. Oh, Mr. Battiston.
I just want to point out that it's my understanding that the BC Building Code allows bedrooms to not have a window egress if the building is sprinklered, which would be common in a building like this. So it's not unusual as long as the building is sprinklered.
Yeah, I understand that it's allowed. It's just whether or not it's livable is what I'm concerned about, especially very small units. So size isn't necessarily as big a deal for me as livability. All right. Any other comments, or can we call the question? We'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Can someone please retrieve